Hi, Jack Matthews, Matthews Southwest. When we get involved in a building, we look at it for the tenant that we're working for first, because generally we don't do spec buildings. We do buildings that have a user in mind. This particular user grew from 700,000 feet when we first sat down with them to 2 million square feet being the end product you see. So you had lots of challenges through the company split into two different tenants, and you had to address those changes. So it's very interesting from a tall building that got taller and wider, how we addressed those issues as we went through it. People judge buildings in many different ways. So plus people look at it from the street and they say, how does it relate to the person walking down the street, and the retail exposure and the feeling you have walking in that front plaza. Other people look at the skyline and say, that is a great building on the skyline. It fits well into the city. Other people say, how sustainable is it in a green effect? And a lot of the people I work with say, how sustainable is it from an economic point of view? Not only what's the original tenant paying, but what's the second use of it? How does that work? At the end of the day, the most important test is, how does it fit for the people using and experience that building? So in the Bow right now, there's about 4,500 people working, living, enjoying it. And if you've got the air handling wrong, if you've got too much sway in the building, if you've got the wrong components on the exterior, they will tell you. I'm happy to say that working with Foster and Partners and many other people to make this a reality, I think we've hit it out of the park as far as all those components. But that's just it. It really took working with, and you'll be impressed with Nigel and his background and what he brought to this deal, as well as his entire team. So I want to introduce Nigel Dancey.
Good afternoon. It's a great honor to be here to talk about the Bow project. Let me just start off. There are a number of themes that we work at in Foster & Partners in office, and that most of them are relevant to most of the projects we do. Calgary was interesting for us, the first time we'd ever been there and worked there. But climate, there's connections. We take it very seriously about the users. Designing from the inside out is one of our themes. Structure, of course, public realm, how the building meets the ground, spaces, and then the use of art within the building. So this is Calgary with the Bow Tower. We arrived for the first time in 2005, and to try and really understand the site, the climate, fantastic views towards the Rocky Mountains. Excuse me. And really, it starts a process of looking at a theme of towers that we've done as a practice. They were all different, from the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank in 1985 to various projects around the world where climate site is taken very specifically, which then ends up dictating or helping with the form of the project and the way that it finally manifests itself. You're seeing Swiss Re, some of our projects in Madrid, Australia, and then the Bow itself compared with the Hearst Tower in New York City. There you go. So themes that we take very seriously. Structure is obviously critical. This is our Millau Bridge. It's 343 meters tall, 2.4 miles long. Structure on its own is something that you can't just have a tower just with structure. There has to be many other facets that you must think about in order to make the building really work. So this is our Swiss Re Tower in London. Sustainability being really a key theme, the way that the air moves around the building, opening windows, the use of kind of slot garden spaces, trying to get light deep into the floor plate, the use of an economic structure, the first building that we had done with a diagrid and external sort of structure. A center core, relatively traditional inside the building, the way that sits on the space. And then the way also we'd use the top of the building, and a lot of conversations about how you deal with the top. The idea that that's a public space, it's a cafe, it's a restaurant, people get 365-degree views. The ground plane is critically important too, and the way we think about space, we think about users, we think about the circulation of the public around the building. This is our project for the British Museum. where a lot of pedestrian flows were done, and analysing a bigger master plan, bringing people through the building. It's one of the most visited buildings in London now with the Great Court. So to Calgary, Rocky Mountains, fantastic skiing, great landscape. A site on the wrong side of the tracks, the wrong side of Centre Street had been located for Encana for a new headquarters building. So the site there is as a parkade at the moment. And then really learning about the Calgarians. And Canadians are outdoor people. They love being outside. The streets are packed in summertime. The wonderful climate, very outdoor kind of living, skiing nearby. But then in the wintertime, very harsh winters. It's to a cold that as a London person, you never experience. It's minus 35 in the wintertime, absolutely freezing. So how do you reconcile the difference in climate between the summer and the winter? How do you make a building and spaces that are usable? Within Calgary, there's this idea about this plus 15 connection. These are kind of covered bridges or enclosed bridges that there's 11 miles of them that connect through the cityscape. And our idea, obviously, was to network, to tie into that infrastructure and bring people through the building at ground level and also at this plus 15 level too. This is one of the bridges. They're interesting architecturally as they try and work their way around the city centre. Then thinking about designing from the inside out, and this is the brief that we were given, and trying to understand what people were going to be doing in the building. It's an oil and gas company, very competitive market in Calgary, trying to keep the best people, get the best people to come and join you. There was our walkthroughs, their existing facilities, and we learned that they really like cellular individual offices, and the idea of open plan, which we discussed, was something they really didn't think they could do. They really thought the people who would be attracted to working kind of in their own individual offices, very highly computerized with the sort of work they were doing. It's a big team effort, and this is one of our workshop sessions in London with Jack and the team, engineers, architects, all coming together, really working on different ideas, lots of different model making, lots of different ideas in terms of the form. But our dilemma is, how do we accommodate as many cellular offices as possible around the perimeter of a building and try and create a great place for people to work? With our workplace consultancy group, we did a lot of interviews with Encana to understand how they worked and built up the idea of understanding about their property teams and their business units, the way that people came together. And that started to lead to a floor plate stack where we could accommodate people. They had a lot of flexibility to move as their departments grew and shrank. And then the idea of trying to think about social spaces, that it's all very well going to your office in the morning to a little individual room, but how do you get people to talk to each other and interact with each other? And so the idea of there being potentially some sky garden spaces, some courtyard spaces up the building where people could meet, interact. So you can see the sky garden levels. It's interesting how, with all the technology we have today, we still make more models than we've ever made before. These are made by the student architects as very good study models. So the idea of there being these interaction spaces, these sky garden floors, where you could have a coffee, you'd actually meet your colleagues and get to know people within the organization. Sustainability is also something that runs through all of the work we do in our practice. We think about orientation, and one of the easy wins in terms of how do you orientate the building right, how do you minimize solar gain or maximize solar gain, how does it work within the climate, before you start getting to more active systems which cost more money, where the payback is nowhere near as good. So the idea of, in fact, from Doug Mass and Cosentini, of orientating the building to be kind of a sun catcher. The atrium faces the sun. We're in a heating climate with the building. So we're trying to capture the sun as we can with the atrium spaces. Interestingly, the views towards the Rocky Mountains were also to the south, so the orientation worked very well. How the building hits the ground, incredibly important, and early ideas about plazas and the way we deal with bridges and connections is something that which we felt very passionately about. The idea of there being retail and some sort of experiences on the ground level was also very important. So your experience as an employee. You arrive in the lobby space. This is a computer rendering that was done fairly early on. You then go into an express elevator. You arrive at one of the Sky Garden spaces, coffee, meet your colleagues. And from there, you go in a local elevator to a floor to your office. So we're encouraging social interaction just with the circulation flows in the building. The sky garden space where people meet, again a rendering. And then a little animation just to try and explain the concept. For there's basement parking, the tower stacks around the cores, 58 stories. And then we have the garden spaces. And there's some social spaces on the highest level to try and encourage the public to come and use the lecture theatres with great views over the city. Then an externally expressed structure, which is a diagram which I'll talk about shortly. Then the cladding envelope. And then the way we deal with the ground plane and trying to make these plus 15 connections to bring people through the base of the tower. The orientation, the views towards the Rocky Mountains in the distance. And then the sun moving across the building, capturing the energy inside those sky gardens, and then shielding the building from the wind with a shape. So in more detail, with Doug Mass and his team, the idea of bringing air through, naturally ventilating the atrium spaces and the garden spaces, and using that extra energy to help make the building more energy efficient, also improving the environment for the people working in the building. And then with Jack and the team about trying to encourage the client to think about the quality of air within the spaces and the use of raised floors and displacement ventilation through the floor to give them the best quality of air to work in. And then around the atrium spaces, the offices have opening windows so they can have some natural ventilation and some fresh air through various times of the year. And again, with Hal Coriolis and Jonathan Hendricks and the team, the idea of the expression of the structure, you could do a traditional column building. We looked at a whole series of different studies, different ways of dealing with the structure. We found that the brace moment frame was actually lighter by 20% in terms of the weight of steelwork than a more traditional structure. This is one of the drawings from the fabricators. And then with mock-ups of looking at the clad in the curtain wall system. And then just to try and deal with the scale, this is a 58-story building. It's 777 feet tall. This is one of the nodes with a real live person standing beside it. It's being fabricated. It's 41 tons steelwork, 100 millimeter thick plate, and then being lifted into place, the first node. There's a node 41 tons, and then steelwork coming up. Incredible tolerances with the fabrication, plus or minus 15 millimeters. And then the 20% saving in terms of the weight of the steel. So ground was broken in 2007. And then we have sort of other interesting quirks in Calgary. There's something called the Stampede, which is sacrosanct. It's a very important celebration for them. And unfortunately, our site was on the Stampede circuit, so that for a year we were able to close the road and do the excavation between the two city blocks for our site. But we had to have the road back so that the Stampede could go ahead as planned 1 year after the construction. So 6 stories of excavation. That's the road going through. And then they build the roadway through so that the Stampede can happen midway through while we're building the steelwork on either side. Only in Calgary. So topping out in 2010, and then a sequence of construction. You can see the changes of climate as we go from 2007 until 2011, as the tower gradually makes its way forward. In closing, you can see the node point so that the welders can be in the warm as they're spending a long time welding that frame for the diagrid to the face of the tower. Sometimes this seems to take as long as it took to build the building. Here we go. So this is now the curtain wall coming up past the garden spaces. See the cranes moving. Again, the climate changing through those winters and summers as we go. And then finally we've got the core on the right-hand side going up. There you go. So interestingly, the ground plane being very important. This is a photograph of the finished building. You can just about see a little white dot. Just there. So that is part of the public art component of the project, and that is an artist called Jamie Plenza, who's a Spanish artist, who basically worked with us to create an art piece, which is a 12-meter high head of a child created in wire. And that's Norman and Lena Foster in the middle of it, looking at it. And this is basically part of the space. This is Jeremy Plenzer at work in his studio. And this has really become an incredibly vital, important social space in Calgary and visited by many, many people day and night. As part of the experience of that plaza, the entrance spaces to the tower beyond. So back on the sequence we talked about before. This is now the finished building. You come in from that plaza space through the lobby spaces, the reception desk, and then that's the plus 15 level with the connections meandering through the space. And then you'd arrive in your office with an individual space with the view towards the Rocky Mountain spaces. You can see the opening window in the background through the atrium space, and then the coffee break in the Sky Garden space. Again, with great views over the city. And then the structure, this is the top of the building where we talked earlier today about who should have the best space. Are you playing with spires and antenna and aerials or whatever? And here we've given the best space in the building to the people, so people can come up to this top of the building and enjoy the great views. So the building, as Jack said, has become very iconic within Calgary in the skyline, the Calgary Tower to the left, and then the great views orientated towards the Rocky Mountains in the distance. And then the most terrifying visit of all, which is Norman Foster walking around the building with his family and trying to gain his approval. And the guy on the left-hand side is James Barnes, who's my partner, who has spent 8 years of his life dedicated to the project and has done an extremely amazing job.
A building can be just a building. It can be bricks and mortar, steel and glass. It can be impressive, dominate the landscape. It can be higher, shinier, anything you like. But it can be just a building. Now, what happens when a building is more than that?
It is that emphasis on the social spaces that is at the heart of our project. So whether it is the 15 plus, which is the 15-foot high connections into the network of pedestrian spaces which connect Calgary, all the individual buildings together, it's about public space as well as the tall building. When I returned to Calgary to see this building, to talk to the people who live in it, who work in it, who shop in it, it's an extraordinary sense of community.
It's really the trend, for the highest officials in the company to be on the highest floors, and that wasn't the decision made.
So now we have the Sky Gardens, and that's what we're seeing, that people are congregating there.
The cross kind of pollination of ideas that happen when people spontaneously meet in impromptu ways in the Sky Gardens here, or in the elevators, that was really a focused effort to create those opportunities for that great creative friction that happens when people bump into each other.
The era of building monuments is over. The time for building community is now.
The collective team recognized very early that really the Bow is about people.
The Bow hosts a community of 4,500 people.
As the design developed, we started to think about the social benefits of the building and how people could meet, interact within the tower, and how they tie into the retail community. And then as they move up, they arrive in express elevators into a Sky Garden space, which is a 6-story space with panoramic views overlooking the Rocky Mountains. And there's coffee shops, places for people to really congregate. And from there they will take an express elevator which takes them up to their office floor, where we maximised on the external perimeter so that there would be maximum individual office spaces with great views over the city.
All of our staff wanted to be in an outside office on the windows. They wanted natural light. And what the Foster and Partners team proved to us in their massing models is that you can get more 10-foot by 15-foot offices on a curve than you can on a straight line.
This is the Bow.
6 floors underground, 2 city blocks long. You can stand on 5th Avenue and actually look all the way down the corridor to 7th Avenue. 2 blocks underground.
The Bow, gives people a very different perspective on their city.
We're seeing the whole East Village now being developed, and we're going to be in the middle of it.
People are very proud of working here, and they really recognize that this is more than just their building. We are really proud to be able to share it with everyone in Calgary.
An intelligent building that is one of the family, part of the landscape.
Low energy sustainability is one of the many stories at the heart of this building. But essentially, it is about a sense of community, and that is very, very powerful, very strong.
You can't walk by the Wonderland piece on the plaza and not see a school class or somebody rubbernecking on the Plaza of the Bow.
It really stops you in your tracks, but it also draws people in.
That's what we've been a part of.
It's more than just a building, it's actually a sense of place.
So a lot of people involved, but thank you very much.